Hi everybody, my name is John Thompson. I'm going to be doing a presentation for you on a interesting project I started. I'm taking the Schreiber Bogen model of the Bremen and modifying it into the sister ship Europa. I've had considerable success so far in the process, and I hope you enjoy the presentation for what it is. I know it's not a perfect, exact 100%, but I'm pretty close, and I can live with that. Okay, the purpose of this model is to basically show you the methodologies that I used in building it, and mainly the idea of kit bashing. Finding a model of the Europa, although a very famous ship, is actually very hard to find, and it's also very expensive when you look up some of the costs of 3D printed models and other models. So the best alternative for this was to take a $20 model of the Bremen, which had a full hull, and modify it into the Europa. So where do we all start when we want to build a model of a ship, say, for instance, a sister ship like Europa? A lot of what I did was internet search. I found photographs, which helped me to get somewhat of an idea. They do offer aspects that, say, for instance, plans might not if I couldn't find any plans. And I also wound up finding a 3D model that was printed. Now, I did find a couple different versions of the ship, and the ship did change in appearance throughout its life as German liner, and then of course later as a French liner. So how does building a paper model differ from building something, say, like a plastic model? Well, for the most part, your paper models pretty much are already colored and painted, so to speak, uh, parts that you basically cut out. You cut the parts out and basically glue them together. You do build a framework on the model. Typically, it'll be of cardboard. So you are going to need some of the similar tools that you would for a plastic model, and maybe a couple of others too. But basic materials, like I mentioned, you're going to need cardboard. You're going to need an X-Acto knife with lots of blades, and you're going to need to change those blades often as you go. I like to use a white glue and Elmer's. I like to use markers and paint for my exposed edges. It just makes the model look a lot better when you don't see the exposed white surface on the model. Uh, Tweezers, another good thing for handling small parts that are very delicate. You can get photo etch, believe it or not, for 1/400th scale model, like which is what this is. And also have a photocopier. And I'll tell you why. Photocopiers are great because you can actually photocopy the parts, and this is good in case, say, for instance, you made a mistake on a detail part, or you basically were shorted, or you couldn't find a part. That will definitely help you. Wire. Wire is a good thing for some of the assemblies like cargo booms. You can also use it for flag and jack staffs. You can also use it to back up and strengthen things like your cargo booms if you're making them out of tubes. Uh, Definitely would also recommend wax paper, because what you're going to be doing is when you lay out the frames and put the keels together, what you're actually going to need is a flat surface, and the wax paper is going to keep the assemblies that you build from sticking to your nice table, which would definitely tend to make someone else in the household mad at you for doing that. So that's the recommendation there. Also, the flat surface will help you to basically ensure a straight hull assembly, and also you can work on squaring too as well. I'd recommend a square, cheap square, like even a metal aluminum square will help you in terms of making sure that your frames and everything are square. This is going to be important later on when you do the assemblies and affect the overall quality of the model, especially when you put the skins on the hull, because that's the biggest and most difficult part of the model. Once you get past that, it's just essentially building a model, and you're cutting smaller assemblies out. Um, and then of course weight again. Weight will be important because when you put it on top of your assemblies, especially your cardboard assemblies, it keeps the hull from twisting and warping, and that's usually very important too, especially after you skin it, skin a hull, and basically are gluing cardboard to other pieces of cardboard that the assemblies have to be square, and you just want to make sure it dries properly before doing anything else. As shown here in the photographs, the hull does build exactly almost in similar way that a real ship would actually be built. You have keels, you have frames, and bulkheads, which basically help define the shape of the final hull later on. Here you see basically the top part of the picture showing the upper and lower hull assemblies joined together. Generally, you have to build them as two separate assemblies, or what you can do is, uh, as in the case of the Bremen that I built, uh, basically join those two assemblies together before you add the hull skins. I did that when I built the Bremen and was able to successfully make a nice hull without a twist. It was actually easier to put the skins on. When I did the Europa here, I did encounter a slight problem. The model was originally intended to be a waterline model, meaning I wasn't going to do the lower hull, but then I decided to, the last minute, use the lower hull pieces because I had them left over. And what I did was I built the assemblies, both of which were flat, but what happened was when I joined them together, it was either the bow that was basically flat and aligned, or the stern was flat and aligned. So essentially what was happening was kind of pivoting almost like a teeter-totter about maybe on a midship assembly, midship part of the lower hull. So what I had to do was basically I put shims up in the bow. I had to shim it up about 1/8 of an inch. And what that did was it brought the stern of the upper hull and lower hull together, and they were actually able to meet uh, perfectly. So that part of the model was good. I had to make sort of a patch uh, and the paint the whole pieces of the patch, which was essentially white paper, and you had the original printed red of the hull itself. So I may try to actually later on to correct that, wind up adding some paint and just paint the whole thing. I'm probably thinking about using a Acuflex Tuscan Oxide Red, like I did on the Bremen. It just looks better when you don't see the streaks anyway. I think it gets a little bit busy, and I like how the model looks without seeing all the streaks when you do the full hull. I liked how it looked on the Bremen, so this is a possibility for this project as well. As I talked about earlier in the presentation, I'm describing basically the construction of lower hull that was actually not really intended to be part of my initial construction. I decided to do it again as just something else to do to broaden my horizons, and I was curious to see how the kit would fit together and how the parts would fit together, following the directions, producing the assembly, and seeing how everything would fit together. I did have some fit issues with the upper hull. I would get the skins going perfect on one side of the ship, on the starboard side in this case, and then I would have the port side. This was the case with the Bremen. Europa actually turned out to be the opposite, where I had a gap on the port side, but I had a perfect length of and fit of the hull skins on the Europa. So that was another part of this that had to be worked on and worked out. In this particular slide, you can see the typical construction of what the upper hull looked like. Essentially, I had to glue all the framing pieces to cardboard, cut out the cardboard, and then of course you see the hull as it's skinned. I had to do things like the anchor hawse after the hull was skinned, and the area where the exposed cardboard is on the upper hull, that actually had to have the promenade posts put in, and that was the last part really of skinning the hull. Pretty much once this was done, it was a matter of putting the upper superstructure piece onto this hull assembly, and then basically, covering up the cardboard, so that way I would have basically the promenade deck and other superstructure elements, the basic superstructure elements in place. And it starts looking like a ship at this point. Up to this point is where it really stops becoming the Bremen and becomes the Europa. In these two photos, you see the contrast between the Bremen and the Europa, and the superstructure is built very much in the same way as they would on the hull. Again, in this slide, I can actually show you some of the areas of inaccuracies that I had on the Europa conversion, mainly being, again, the Winter Garden turnaround. Number 3, that's section number 1. Number 3 basically referred to the windows on the aft end of the promenade. Then I had number 2, I had to make new funnels and new bases. I had to lengthen the superstructure. And also there's a deck house aft on number 5. I had to change the roof of that, so that became uh, a main basic alteration. I started out with basic shapes, and then I detailed it all out later. Okay, I'm going to talk to you right now about some of the main criticisms of the Bremen model kit itself, Schreiber Bogen. One, because it's paper. If you accidentally glue a part together, it's a little harder to take apart than plastic. So keep that in mind. It's going to require you to be a little more experienced in working on it. The other thing, too, is when you look at the pictures, this is the second page of the directions. I showed it to you on an earlier slide. You'll see how it can be very confusing with where the parts go, and there are mistakes. So there are not perfect directions either. So one of the best things to do if you want to build this model as Bremen, you can look at the photographs at least on the cover to the basically the paper set, and that'll help you out. Also, you're going to have to make adjustments to some of the skins. You're going to have fit issues in parts, so you may either have to reprint or add or modify the parts and create little patches on them to basically hide the repairs you had to make. Okay, folks, while I call this completing the model, there's just, as you can see in the photos, there's still actually quite a bit left to do on her. And so here you see basically in the top photo, I've added the lifeboats, the masts. I've done quite a bit of work since then. So what I'm going to do at the end of this slide is basically call this part 1. So I will be making a presentation that shows the actual finished model, because there's still quite a bit left to go. I have to add rigging and flags and all the other final details that go on. I also have to make details around the stack base. So this is going to be basically the end of part 1. But as you can see, it's a basic superstructure. I started off with something very crude and just rough shapes, and then I detailed out the shapes. So the model is progressing very nicely at this point as a full hull model.